On this International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, anti-hate and human rights groups are calling for the federal government to create and implement a Canada-wide anti-hate strategy. Advocates say racism and inequity exists, and now there are numbers to back that up. A recent report from Stats Canada showed police-reported hate crimes rose by 37% in 2020 compared to the previous year, with crimes motivated by hatred of a race or ethnicity climbing by 80% in the same time period. So, how far have we truly come, and what can we do on a community level to stomp out racism and hate? For that, we welcome to CP24 tonight Fareed Khan, founder of Canadians United Against Hate, and Amy Go, president of the Chinese-Canadian National Council for Social Justice. Thanks to both of you. Fareed, we're coming off this past weekend where there was what police say was another hate-motivated attack here in the GTA, this time at a Mississauga mosque. How are Muslims feeling today when it comes to their personal safety?
Well, I think whenever these sorts of incidents are reported, Muslims feel vulnerable. And by the way, this is not the only incident that occurred this past weekend. There was also an incident on the weekend in a mosque in St. John's, Newfoundland, where there were vandals who attacked the mosque while there were worshippers inside. So this is something that Muslims have gotten used to, sadly. But they're also now calling for further actions by government to not only protect them, but also to stand up against racists and white supremacists and haters who have seemed to been emboldened over the last few years to go out and attack people who are racialized.
And we know Muslims, of course, aren't the only group targeted. Stats Canada saying police reported anti-Asian hate crimes here in Canada jumping 300% in 2020. Amy, talk about how accurate those numbers are.
Definitely, those numbers actually probably just reflect the tip of the iceberg, that these are the ones reported to the police across the country. But in fact, in reality, the experiences of racism and racist attack and online hate by Asian Canadians, in fact, are probably felt daily. Many of those are just not reported. In fact, our partner organizations continue to receive reports on the online portals. And unfortunately, the communities still feel vulnerable, just like the Muslim communities. And many of them don't even feel comfortable reporting that to the police.
Can you talk more about that? What are some of the barriers? Why don't more people report hate crimes?
So there are a number of things, right? There has to be an element of trust. They have to trust the authorities and first of all, believe their stories, as well as would take actions that would be effective. Unfortunately, we have this, this history of the police have not been able to demonstrate that they will be able to address the needs of the racialized communities, such as Asian Canadian communities, and of course the Black Canadian communities and all that, in an adequate manner. That they don't feel that we are being treated fairly. They don't feel that we are being, the Asian communities do not feel that we are being treated by the authorities or by the justice system. So as a result of that, many of them would not necessarily come forward. And of course, there's also the language barriers of reporting. There's also, where do you find the authority to report those incidents?
Fareed, you held an event today about this day, sort of calling attention to hate in this country. So given the fact that we're having more public dialogue and discussion around diversity and inclusion, do you expect that more people, more marginalized people, will feel comfortable coming forward and reporting hate crimes?
Well, I think it depends on how governments and police react. I'll give you an example. Of course, we had in Ottawa a occupation and protest that was organized by people who were known white supremacists, Islamophobes, and anti-Semites. And they were able to take over and occupy Ottawa. There were visible symbols of hate and messaging that were carried by white people at that protest, and yet the authorities did nothing. And yet, if we have similar protests by people who are racialized, whether they're Black, Indigenous, the police very quickly move in to break up those protests. So I think there's a perception out there, and I think it's well-founded perception that if you are white, you're able to get away with certain things, but if you are racialized, you're not. And that sows distrust within between racialized communities and the police. In addition, we had a situation in Ottawa, and I'm sure that there are other incidents across the country, where there were reports that there may have been police, Ottawa police, who were leaking information to the protesters. That in itself is very disturbing because it once again shows that there's a segment within the policing fraternity that was sympathetic to these people. And you have similar situations in different parts of the country where there have been police who have been outed because of posting hateful messaging on social media. So if you have that type of an attitude among certain segments of the police that are supposed to enforce the law, then there is a level of distrust. And so it's no wonder that racialized communities don't report all the hate crimes that they may be subjected to.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about domestic hate. I do want to ask, though, Amy, how pervasive is racism and discrimination in Canada's foreign policies?
So I guess, inevitably, whenever there is a geopolitical dynamics between China and Canada, right away, unfortunately, the victims are the Chinese Canadians or the Asian Canadians, because it's like, that Chinese are deemed to be foreigners, that we are too loyal to China. So when Canada and China are at odds or don't agree, unfortunately, we bear the brunt of that, of that attack. And so I think it's important for Canada, absolutely, Canadian government should uphold our obligation, international obligation in terms of human rights, in terms of all the UN covenants that protect human rights and freedoms across the globe. At the same time, when we are doing so, we need to be very mindful that we are not at the same time further vulnerable, making the Chinese Canadians or other Canadians more vulnerable. For example, when we are, sort of fighting the Islamist, extremist elements in other parts of the world, then you don't treat the Islamic communities here as extremists. So I think it is important for us to recognize and see our foreign policies do not become a tool for white supremacists to further their hate. At the same time, we really need to look at our foreign policies using the lens of anti-racism and the anti-oppression across. So we are not condoning or condemning only certain countries for perpetrating hate and racism or, and all that, and not others. So we need to be very mindful and very careful in terms of how we exercise our global citizenry.
And Fareed, the world is watching what's happening in Ukraine right now, Canada accepting an unlimited number of Ukrainian refugees. How do you see Canada's immigration policy?
Well, I think it has a racial nature to it. We had a situation last year where our allies in Afghanistan wanted to flee as the Taliban took over, but there was no similar policy implemented to help them leave the country. The tools that are being used to punish Russia for its invasion of Ukraine were not used, for example, to punish Saudi Arabia in its war against Yemen. And by the way, we are complicit. Canada is complicit in that war because we are selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. Similarly, the laws that have been broken, the international laws that have been broken, the violations of the UN Charter have also been violated by the State of Israel and in its actions against Palestinians. And yet we are not talking about that. We're not implementing the same sorts of penalties against that country, and so it calls into question about the way that Canada reacts to international conflicts. It seems that with Ukraine, we're pulling out all the stops, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I think that the Ukrainians are facing just a heinous situation They're facing crimes against humanity perpetrated by Russian forces, and we need to help them. We need to bring them here if they are willing to settle here. But we should use the same standard for all others, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what their skin color is, and what their faith is. And I think we need a whole rethink on how our foreign policies are applied, because I believe very strongly that in many ways Canada's foreign policy is applied with a racist lens.
A very interesting discussion. Fareed Khan and Amy Go, thanks so much to both of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.